Hi everyone! Welcome back to my channel. Today I am tier ranking all of the fantasy standalone books that I have ever read, and there is a little bit of a mix between some adult and some young adult fantasy in this list. And what I realized making my tier template was I have not read a whole lot of fantasy standalones, and I need to remedy that. I definitely need to prioritize more fantasy standalones because some of them are absolutely fantastic, and it's nice not having to commit yourself to an entire series. So I already tier ranked the first books in every fantasy series I've ever read. So if you want to see that list, I will make sure to link that video down below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about all of the fantasy standalones and what I think of them. All right, so here is the tier list, and I have the same categories I had for my previous tier ranking video. So top is favorite of all time. Then we have incredible, not quite a favorite, but still like 4 or 5 stars. Pretty darn good. I would still recommend these that are in this tier. They're just not quite maybe for me, or not quite a favorite. It was fine. I don't have like strong feelings either way. And then not for me. So these are ones that I did not like. So let's start. Oh my gosh, the first one is Tigana. Yeah, let's start controversial, I guess. I did not like Tigana at all. I don't think there was anything about it that I liked. I recognize that Guy Gavriel Kay's writing is quite beautiful, but for me, I don't love super poetic writing styles. I don't really put like writing style as kind of something that I really look for. Like, I don't look for beautiful writing styles when I go into a fantasy book. I more look for plot, characters, pacing, that sort of thing. And this was just a really slow book. I really never knew what the plot of it was. The characters never did anything for me. And honestly, I was just kind of confused most of the time as to like what we were doing, why we were doing it. So that one did not work at all for me. I'm so sorry to the Tigana fans out there. However, Guns of the Dawn, this next one by Adrian Tchaikovsky, is a favorite of all time. So we're just starting at the extremes here. Guns of the Dawn is amazing. It is a military fantasy where you have a main character named Emily who feels like she is straight out of a Jane Austen novel, and she is put into a war as a soldier. So you are following her as she is kind of surrounded by fellow soldiers fighting in this war. And one of the big themes of the book is like, how do you know that you're actually fighting for the right side? Like, is there a right side in a war? And is some of the propaganda maybe hiding some of the truth behind the war? And it's really interesting to explore those themes, but it was also just awesome to see Emily kind of be the fish out of water in this war, and to see like the military tactics of the soldiers with boots on the ground on this battlefront that's very much in like a swampland type terrain. It was so good. I love that book so much. A perfect standalone, will always be one of my favorites of all time. Uprooted, I'm going to say, like, if I had a one right in between, it was fine and pretty darn good. I'll say pretty darn good. I know a lot of people do not like this book. I did overall think it was pretty good. I gave it, I think, 3.5 stars, and it read very much like a dark fairy tale. It's following a woman who gets taken away by this man who lives in this tower. I don't remember a ton of it. Oh my gosh. Maybe I should drop it to It Was Fine. I really like Naomi Novik's writing. I really like her writing style. It worked really well for me, and I did like the fairy tale feel of this one. And I think that the characters themselves weren't outstanding, but I liked them enough to keep me moving through the book. So it was pretty darn good. I think this is one that I can see why it has so many mixed reviews. I can see why people would love it. I can see why people would not like it at all. So it's kind of up to you, personal preference. It's worth a shot if it sounds good to you. A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness is a favorite of all time for me. Oh my gosh, that is more of a middle grade / YA fantasy book, and I read it in one sitting and I bawled my eyes out. It is about a little boy who has a sick mother, and every night he gets visited by this monster. And the monster is, it's kind of one of those situations where, like, is it real? Is it not? And essentially the monster is teaching this boy how to grieve, how to accept, how to move on. And it is so emotional, so good. Oh my gosh, just thinking about it makes me tear up. So I can't think about it much, but it's beautiful. I love that book so much. And Enchantment of Ravens, I'm going to say incredible. This is not an all-time favorite, but I loved it. And I loved the themes explored in this one. So I think if you go into this one expecting like a wonderful fantasy romance, that's not necessarily what I would pitch this book as, even though, like, yes, it is a fantasy romance at its core. That's kind of the primary plot, but I think it's much more about like what it means to be human, and that's why I loved the book so much. And the romance was kind of, for me, just a little bit of a cherry on top. Like it was the side order, not the main entree for me in that book. But I really enjoyed it, and I loved the cozy feeling. I loved the setting. I loved the length. It was very short and sweet. I just had a really good time with it. I just found it very heartwarming, let's say that. The Changeling by Victor LaValle. This is more of a fantasy horror book, and this one I'm going to say was pretty darn good. This one, for me, the first part of the book reads more like a horror / general fiction type novel, and then the second half of the book is where you get like the fantasy part of it. And I liked the first part much more than I liked the fantasy part of it. It's very graphic at times. Be warned, this is definitely horror and has some pretty disturbing content in it, but I really like Victor LaValle's writing style. I really liked his character work here. I thought it was really well done. The plot and the pacing just felt a little off for me towards the second half of the book, but I did really enjoy that first half, and I did overall, like for the entirety of the book, enjoy characters and writings. I definitely want to read more Victor LaValle in the future for sure. Circe, I'm going to say incredible. This is one that for me is not an all-time favorite, but I loved it when I read it. I loved Circe as the main character, and this is one that kind of inspired my hunt for more Greek mythology retellings that would kind of give me this feeling that Circe gave me. And I have to say, I don't know that I've found one that I've liked quite as much as Circe quite yet. Maybe there's one that's close. So I really love Circe. Madeline Miller's writing style is beautiful, and I just loved, for me, I had never known about Circe before reading this book. I don't know the original mythology around that, so it was all kind of discovering new stuff for me, but I really enjoyed it. So, Spitting Silver by Naomi Novik. This one, oh my gosh, I wish I had one right in between Pretty Darn Good and Incredible. I'm going to put it at the bottom of Incredible, or maybe at the top of Pretty Darn Good. No, bottom of Incredible, because I did give this 4 stars. I love the first half of Spinning Silver. That first half following our main character, who is the daughter of a moneylender, and her family is extremely poor because her father is a very horrible moneylender. He is much too generous. He doesn't go after the money that people owe him, so they're very, very poor. And when the main character's mother becomes sick and they have a hard time feeding her, she takes it upon herself to take over her father's business and actually make people pay her family back. So I loved that first half and exploring that. When we got to the fantasy part of it, that's when it lost me a little bit. when we like traveled into the fantasy world. I didn't love that stuff, but the rest of the book was so good, and when I started this book, I was like, this is gonna be an all-time favorite, and then it kind of lost me a little bit in the middle, but it was still like overall a 4-star experience. Really, really good, just not to the level that I was expecting based off of my feelings on the first part of the book. Sword of Kaigen now is a favorite of all time. This is one that the more I think about it, the more I just love it upon reflection. No book has ever made me, like A Monster Calls, no book has ever made me bawl as much as this one did. The emotional roller coaster that this book is incredible. I love Sword of Kaigen, and I love Misaki as the main character so much. Her journey through motherhood and balancing being a mother with being like this incredibly powerful warrior that she is was such a cool character arc to follow, and her relationship with her husband and exploring that more was so good. That is so amazing. So Sword of Kaigen, it's not a perfect book. There are a couple things that bothered me a little bit about it, but I can so easily look past those things because the majority of this story hit so hard for me. It really did. Never Die, I'm going to put in incredible. I really liked this book. I thought that it was so much fun. It was super unique. The concept was super cool. Never Die follows a little boy who is able to bring back these legendary heroes from the dead, and when he brings them back, they are tethered to him, and he is on a journey, a mysterious journey that he is kind of recruiting these dead heroes from the past to follow him to accomplish this mission. And I don't want to say what the mission is, because that's kind of the fun, is discovering what it is they're doing. And it's so much fun picking up all of the different characters along the way. The characters themselves are really fun. I had a really good time with this one. So I would definitely check out more Rob J. Hayes. I know that there's a couple other books in this Mortal Techniques. Is that the overall series? This is a standalone, but I think that there's companion novels that can go alongside this in the same world. So I definitely want to read those for sure. House in the Cerulean Sea, that is the favorite of all time as well for me. I love the cozy feeling this book gave me. It made me smile throughout, and I just love the heartwarming message at the center of it. And I love Lucy so much. Lucy is my favorite little love. I love Lucy, which is so bizarre because if you know Lucy's real name, you'd be like, Jessie, are you okay? It's so good. So good. I love it. Ring Shout. Ring Shout is also a favorite. Oh, this is such a good novella. This is the only novella I've ever loved. All of the other novellas have always been like, meh, for me, but Ring Shout was just a perfect novella. A perfect amount of character work and depth, perfect amount of explorations of themes, and the monsters in this book were so gritty and gross and creepy, and I loved the horror elements in it. It was so good. So I love Ring Shout. I think that this one is fantastic as a novella. Under the Whispering Door, I'm going to say it was fine. For me, this one, after reading The House in the Cerulean Sea, I was really expecting to love Under the Whispering Door because I love exploring themes of death and what happens after death and mortality and all that stuff. And for me, this one, the problem with it was I just didn't care about the characters. And that's really at the heart of this. If you don't care about the characters in this book, then it can't possibly work. Because you really are, you have to be rooting for the characters and for their redemption and that sort of thing. So I thought it was fine. It's not something that I would ever turn anyone away from, but it's not something I'm going to shout from the rooftops about. So It was fine. I'm glad I read it, but it's fine. The Witch's Heart, I'm going to say incredible. I loved this. This is one that came so close to Cersei level for me. The Witch's Heart follows one of the wives of Loki in Norse mythology, and how she gives birth to creatures that are, I guess, from the famous like Norse legends, and her exploration of the relationship with Loki is so interesting. And I loved, again, like themes of motherhood. I loved her kind of having to not only overcome this relationship with Loki, but then kind of have to like be her own champion towards the end. It was really good. So I love The Witch's Heart. I thought it was really good. Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Barron. This one, I'm going to say it was fine. For me, this is one that I think if I had read this when I was a lot younger, I would have really enjoyed it. Cinderella's Dead is taking the Cinderella story, and it's not retelling it. So do not go into this book thinking it's a Cinderella retelling. It's actually taking the events of Cinderella and putting a story in the same universe as Cinderella, but it's following what would have happened after Cinderella had passed on, and what does her legacy mean for the world she leaves behind. And so that was really, really interesting to explore. For me, like, it just read so young, and that's not fair at all to criticize it for that, because it's young adult, and young adult is supposed to span from ages like 12, 13, all the way to 18. And so that like 12 to 13 demographic would probably love this, and I probably would have loved it too. But for me, like young adult, there are stories in young adult that I think any age can enjoy, and that makes it like a really special story. But this is one that I think is firmly for young adults, which is wonderful and great, and there needs to be stories like that. It just was not necessarily something that I personally found a ton of enjoyment out of. So I would recommend Cinderella is Dead, but I'd recommend it to a younger audience. Kaikeyi. So this is one that I also thought was incredible. I'm going to put it like right around here. I really enjoyed Kaikeyi. I think that I wasn't familiar with the original myth, but exploring this kind of villain origin story and understanding motivations behind like perceived villains is so interesting to me. And again, I love the themes of motherhood. Anytime a book touches on that, it's always something I'm a fan of. I really thought that this was beautifully written, a really good debut. I would read anything else that this author puts out. Just a gorgeously written world, characters, family dynamics, messy family dynamics, really good. Nettle and Bone was also incredible. I'm going to put this up towards the top because I really liked it. So much fun. It's like a dark fairy tale, but with a lot of humor thrown in. That is the best way I can describe Nettle and Bone. And I don't think it's all sunshine and rainbows. Like, it's not the most lighthearted. There are some very serious topics this one is tackling. So I don't want you to go in thinking this is like a super cozy, warm, sweet story. Like, it's dealing with some pretty heavy topics. It's dealing with a character who's trying to save her sister from a very abusive marriage. But there is a lot of like humor and heart thrown into this one. And I think it was just really well written. I really liked the characters. So I really enjoyed that one. The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy was not for me, but it was not as bad as Tigana, so I'm going to put it above Tigana, if it'll let me. So for me, Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Megan Bannon read like a contemporary romance, but it's supposed to be a fantasy romance. So I went in thinking it would be like a balance of fantasy and romance, and it was not. The fantasy elements in this book are very, very light. It's not at all about the fantasy world, about the fantasy magic, or anything like that. It is very much focused on this enemies to lovers relationship and romance between these two main characters, and that is it. So if you go into this book with the right expectations, then I think you might really enjoy it. For me, I did not like the two main characters, so I think I wasn't able to like root for them. I didn't care about them. I actually at some points was like actively not liking them, so they really got on my nerves. A lot of what they did like really bothered me. So I just found like the enemies, like the insta hate was so over the top, and then the insta love was so over the top. I just it did not work for me, but I know a lot of people love this, so don't let me dissuade you. If it sounds good to you, go into it just with the right expectations, that it is much more about the romance than anything else. Electra. Oh goodness, Electra. I'm going to say pretty darn good. The reason being, I really enjoyed certain perspectives in Electra. There was one character in particular that I loved in Electra. However, for a book named Electra, I hated Electra, and she wasn't really in it a whole lot, but she was my least favorite part of the book, so I can't like give it that incredible status because I just really couldn't stand her, and I think that maybe that was the point, but the one other character was so good, and I wanted more of her story, and I was like, forget Electra, just give me all of this other character. So that was a little bit disappointing, but it was still really good. Like, I did still really enjoy the writing. I would definitely check out more by Jennifer Saint, so take that as you will. The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O. It was fine. This is one that, for me, as a standalone, I just wanted more. This is like one of the few that I think would have really benefited from being a series or just having more pages in it. It was a really cool concept where this girl, to save her brother's love, she sacrifices herself to the sea god so that the brother's love doesn't have to, and she gets transported to the spirit world. And I loved the spirit world. I loved the idea of exploring themes of ancestry in this spirit world, but I just wanted more of the world. I wanted more like character depth. I wanted more everything. It just felt all very surface level for me, so that's why it was fine. It was like sweet and cute, and I would still recommend it, but it wasn't like the best thing ever. The Book of Gothel, I'm also gonna say it was fine. This is one that from the cover appears to be a Rapunzel retelling, but from the perspective of Mother Gothel. It is not a Rapunzel retelling. It is Mother Gothel's story before Rapunzel is ever a thing. So if that sounds good to you, check it out. Mother Gothel as a character is not like the most compelling character I've ever read from. I was a little bit bored at times by her story, but there were other times where it was quite interesting. So, I mean, there were things that I did like about this book, but for the most part, especially like my expectations going in, it just didn't quite work as well as I was hoping it would. So yeah, it was fine. The Monsters We Defy by Leslie Penelope. This is one I'm going to put at the top of pretty darn good. I really loved the concept and the magic system in this one. So you're following a character who's a clairvoyant in New York City, I think in like the 20s or 30s. So it's a fun time period to be following. And she, as a clairvoyant, she has these abilities that she's cursed with, and she is hired to pull off this heist to steal this valuable thing. And she has to gather a group of people to help her pull off this heist. And each person that she recruits also has a curse, but each curse kind of takes a different form based off of the person's like personality and soul. So seeing how each person's curse worked and how that aligned with their character and who that character was so interesting. I loved that. However, I just wanted more of the characters interacting with each other, because that was some of my favorite parts of the book, was when we got to see these characters and their dynamics between each other, and we just didn't get a whole lot of that. So for me, like, again, this is one where I kind of just wanted more. I would have loved if this was a series, because the world was cool, the magic was cool, the characters I liked, but there just wasn't quite enough for it to get to that incredible status. So yeah, this is one I would definitely still recommend, though. It was a lot of fun. I wish it had even more of what my favorite part of the book was, which was like the character interactions. A Dowry of Blood was incredible. I'm going to put it at the very top of incredible, by S.T. Gibson. This is a story that's following one of Dracula's brides, and it's telling the story of her relationship with Dracula and how it's very, very manipulative, very abusive, and it's very much a story at its heart that's examining like very abusive relationships, and I thought it was just explored so masterfully and so beautifully told. It was really interesting to see a story from one of Dracula's wives, because you always hear so much about Dracula, but you never really get the wife's perspective. So I really loved this. I thought it was fantastic, and I thought the theming behind it was really powerful, and I just really loved the writing and the characters. So yeah, I highly recommend Dowry of Blood. Tress of the Emerald Sea is a favorite of all time for me. I'm going to put it right here, by Brandon Sanderson. I love this. It was so much fun. It was a super cool world. It was super cool magic. Great characters, everything I love about Brandon Sanderson. The actual writing was like some of the quirkiest that I've ever seen Sanderson do. I really liked the humor in it. I really liked the point of view that was telling the story. I just thought it was fantastic. So there wasn't really anything that I didn't like about this book. Half a Soul, I'm also going to say, was incredible, by Olivia Atwater. This is one that is like a Regency romance, and it is so cute. It's following a woman who, when she's younger, a fairy steals half her soul. So as she grows up, she realizes that her emotions are kind of muted, and she doesn't feel things as strongly as others. And in this Regency time period, where like manners and behaving properly like a lady are everything, she is very much seen as an outcast, and she meets this man who sees the best in her, and it's just so cute. It's so cute and so heartwarming, and I loved it, and I highly recommend it. It's adorable. The Last Tale of the Flower Bride is a favorite of all time. This is one that I struggled putting on this fantasy standalones, because I don't really think of this as a fantasy book. I think of this much more as like a mystery novel with some magical realism tied in. But it did come in a fantasy book subscription box, so I'm going to put it in this list anyway. I love The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. I love the mystery. I love the writing so much. The writing is very flowery, which is not something I typically love, but it worked so well for me in this book. I loved it. I just thought this was fantastic. So yeah, this one was hands down one of my favorites of the year so far, and I love it. I thought it was perfection. I just want to go back and reread it like as soon as I can. Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson is a favorite of all time for sure. I actually liked this more than Mistborn, which I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion or not. I love the characters. I love Ciri and the God King. I love the magic system. I loved how it had like this Gods Walk Among Us trope, where you have a divine character who doesn't believe he's divine. He doesn't believe in his own divinity, which is hilarious, and you just had so many fun characters. I just thought that this was the most fun I've had with a Sanderson novel, so I just really love the tone of this one, and yeah, the characters have my whole heart. And then The Night Circus finally it was fine. It was very much more about the atmosphere and the setting rather than like the plot and the characters, which definitely can work for some readers, but just for me, I prefer plot and character over atmosphere and setting and writing style. So that's why for me it just wasn't great, but I can see why others love it because the writing was quite beautiful and the setting was quite vivid. It just lacked some plot and some character development that I like to have. So that is my tier ranking list of all of the fantasy standalones. Did you see any that you've read, and do you agree? Do you disagree? And then what's your favorite fantasy standalone of all time? Leave those comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye.